So I'm really pleased to be joined by Dr. Thomas, Nick Ballamy, and Luis Santiago Pinto. Before I let them introduce themselves, otherwise I will butcher it, I'll just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Matt Adams, the Transport Policy Manager at the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology, or REA for short. We represent about 100 electric vehicle infrastructure companies, along with 500 renewable energy and clean tech companies. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our brilliant panel to introduce themselves very quickly as well. So I'll start from left to right on my screen. So I'll start with Luis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation here. My name is Luis Santiago Pinto. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Powerdot. And Powerdot is a charge point operator. We are one of the largest fast and ultra-fast charger operator in Europe. We are very focused on destination charging. We believe that charging vehicles should be as easy as charging a smartphone. And we started in Portugal back in 2018. Today, we operate in 6 markets: Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Poland, with more than 7K charging points operating, plus 8K more under construction. And we have 200 people in our team operating this network. So I'm very glad to be here.
Thanks, Luis. Going up to Nick next.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name is Nick Ballamy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of EVC. EVC are a charge point operator, operating just over 2,000 charging points in the UK, purely focused on also destination charging points, predominantly providing AC chargers, but also DC charging points to a multitude of different sectors on a client-funded and fully funded basis. We're here to help bridge that gap and provide convenient, affordable, and accessible charging points. And ultimately, I think the big thing for us in the UK, where we're currently focused on, is making sure that they're more accessible and more convenient, so we can help the uptake of EV and the future goal for the UK.
Thanks, Nick. And going up to Dr. Thomas.
Yeah, good morning, Tom Verghese. I work for Enersys. Enersys are a large multinational global battery supplier, predominantly based in the industrial space. So we supply a lot of batteries to the infrastructure in the UK.
Brilliant, thanks. So thank you very much, everyone. So I suppose let's kick things off by trying to answer the question: destination versus rapid charging. What is the priority? So let's say, is there competition between destination and rapid charging? And Nick, as you're not on mute, maybe you want to come in first.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and obviously I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I think in terms of a priority, they're both a priority. There's absolute requirement for rapid charging and destination charging. I think early sort of movement in the UK market especially has been very much focused on rapid charging. But as we've seen from the drivers of the UK, one of the barriers to entry is not having enough infrastructure. And ultimately that's one of the sort of talking points for us, and as a business we're focused on is making sure that there's enough charging points in the right locations. We're a big believer of bringing convenience to the public of the UK, to give them the confidence that they can make that switch to an EV. One of the biggest barriers is people don't like change, and putting charge points in the right locations to meet the dwell time of that car park allows people to make that transition at ease and with confidence. And when we're talking about destinations, these are car parks where people are used to going as part of their daily routine. As we know, cars are parked for 93% of the time. So if charge points can be strategically deployed in those locations, people are going to feel the urge to make that transition because it's an easy switch for them rather than potentially having to stop. But that doesn't take the importance out of other charging points as well. For example, rapid charging points, people commute around, they will need to stop off and have charging sessions, as well as commercial fleets. And then also on-street charging, which is somewhat a destination, but another type of form of charging.
So yeah, what I've really picked up on there then is that the need to make sure we have enough of the right infrastructure in the right place to enable people to have the confidence in getting an EV more quickly. So Thomas, from your perspective then, in terms of getting the batteries in the right places as well, are you finding it, particularly in the UK, quite an attractive option for charge point operators as we're facing grid connection issues and things like that. So.
I think everything is systemic. Your batteries can certainly help with the infrastructure by effectively smoothing it out, by increasing output, etc. But batteries or any energy storage are only part of the solution, and clearly it's in order to build a charger you need the infrastructure in place, and that's not just the batteries, it's just everything else that sits behind that, and I would suggest that that's both for rapid charging and other sorts of charging as well.
Fantastic. And Louise, you've got charge points all over Europe, if I remember correctly from our previous conversation. So with that in mind, how are you seeing the uptake of electric vehicles across Europe as you're rolling out more infrastructure? Is it increasing?
Well, I believe that Europe is moving at different speeds. So depending on the country, we've seen higher or lower adoption. Good examples are like Portugal and France, where we've seen adoption of EVs increasing a lot and very fast in the last 4 years. Other countries such as Spain and Poland they're lagging a little bit behind. But I think that the perspectives are very positive, as in all countries we start to see the uptick in EV sales in the last couple of years. So this goes in line with the EV charging deployment. So the countries where there's higher EV sales, is where the networks are most developed. So in the end, I believe that having a robust network is a key factor for people to buy an electric vehicle in the end.
And if we stick on the theme then of improving confidence in the charging infrastructure, one of the big differences between Europe and the UK is potentially the ease of payment, particularly when we're thinking about how easy it is to roam across a lot of Europe versus in the UK. So I think going forward, we might see people prefer and move towards things other than roaming, other than contactless payment, possibly, as we're seeing it roll out across the UK quite quickly now. And going towards something called plug and charge. So maybe if I may pick on one of you to maybe define plug and charge, and then we'll go from that. So Thomas, as you're not on mute.
Oh, so sorry, I was going to defer to one of my colleagues. I think that they might be as charger suppliers, they might be better placed than me to answer that question.
Fair enough. So maybe Nick then. Plug and charge.
Yeah, so plug and charge is a future technological development influenced by the OEMs. It's the OEMs that are moving and developing out the future technologies for us. And I think this is really the future of EV charging. This allows drivers and owners of vehicles to register a payment card to their vehicle for an application, and there'll be different applications. Electroversa are one of the sort of leading e-roaming networks that have enabled this with a number of different OEM manufacturers. And ultimately what it allows the drivers to turn up to a charge point, plug their car in, and start charging. And as we know, especially if we're looking at the UK market, there's been a lot of noise and sort of media attention around the accessibility and ease of use of charge points. There's been articles saying, well, I need 25 different applications on my phone to be able to use multiple different charging points. And yes, there's been regulation brought in, which is putting credit card readers on all charge points over 8 kilowatts, moving forward, which I think is a good step in the right direction for the industry. But actually, if we want to really get to the point where there is convenience and easy use, then seeing the introduction and the acceleration of plug and charge is going to cut that barrier to entry down, and that concern around drivers that have the fear of, well, I may not be able to pay, or may have to go for a long process to just even charge my car, just by being able to plug in. So I think, it's a really exciting development. Ultimately, it's in the hands of the OEMs. I think us as charge point operators, us certainly would develop all our own technology in-house, and we're ready to make that feature available to the drivers on our network. But ultimately, this is in the hands of the OEMs, and at the moment, we've only got a small percentage of vehicles of the OEM's fleets that have that capability. I think the positive step is that this is short to medium term, not long term, as it's a software technological feature in a vehicle, and it's not a hardware upgrade that vehicles are required to have.
So, no, thanks, Nick. So, Louise, Thomas, do you agree then that really we need the OEMs possibly to move a bit quicker to get plug and charge rolled out more quickly? Maybe it's not just plug and charge, but also thinking about things like vehicle to grid compatibility. For me, in the UK, we had the zero emissions vehicle mandate recently, and one of the key misses, I feel, is that we didn't mandate vehicle to grid within the ZEV mandate, because that would have really increased the rollout of vehicle to grid compatible vehicles. So, yeah, do you think that the manufacturers need to move quicker? Maybe some of them are on the call today.
So I think the manufacturers will be driven not just from the UK, but by supply into the whole of Europe. That they'll just see it as one big market, particularly Chinese manufacturers, who I think will have a bigger role to play over the next few years. So I think we should be looking at UK regulatory frameworks, but also the EU and how that fits in with pushing the manufacturers into adopting this.
Fantastic. Louise.
Yeah, I think on the plug and charge technology, well, I believe there is alternative technologies that for the end user at the end of the day is the same experience, provides the same experience, which is called auto charge. So right now, auto charge is ready to be deployed and to be used in most of the car brands existing today. If we exclude the Volkswagen Group, all other cars are compatible with auto charge. So it's really a protocol definition which is different from plug and charge and auto charge. But for the end user, the experience is the same. You park your car, connect, and you just go and do whatever you want to do. We already deployed auto charge in all the markets where we operate. It's a major step into a better user experience in the end. Although it doesn't, Volkswagen Group vehicles don't work with this technology. So in the end, what I think it's necessary is to have an alignment between all car manufacturers and decide which path to follow. One of the paths is controlled by the Volkswagen Group, which is the plug and charge path. The other one is more open source kind of path, which is I think more practical and more user friendly for CPOs and all the other players within the EV charging market.
Our consumers using your network, picking up on auto charge and noticing the difference.
Excuse me, can you repeat your question?
I mean, are your customers picking up on auto charge and noticing the difference and the ease of pay and how easy it is to pay?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are integrated with multiple EMSPs. So our network is integrated, and we only launch auto charge with one of them yet. But this is gonna evolve, and we're gonna launch it with several EMSPs in the future. But the first reactions, and this is something quite new, but the first reaction from users is quite positive, and the experience is quite amazing. You just install an app, you put money in that app, and then everywhere you go, you connect your car and just leave your car, and everything happens automatically, invoicing, everything. So it's quite an amazing experience in the end.
Oh, thank you. So I suppose let's say then we've resolved ease of payment. Now we need to work out what other barriers there are to getting more people into EVs. So I suppose my question to you all is, how do we get more people into EVs in order to speed up adoption? So on our pre-call, Nick and I spoke about the right to charge and how basically, which they have in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands essentially what you have is a mandate to Louise is on the move, a mandate to that a landlord has to allow you to put in a charge point unless it goes over a certain threshold of cost for the grid connection, which I think is about £6,000. So to my mind, that's great because that improves uptake among people living in rental properties, which is a lot of people in the UK. But I'd be really interested to hear what other solutions our panel has to getting more people into EVs. Is it a financial thing? Are there others? Thomas.
I think certainly first of all, financially is the big driver. I would suggest, and as battery technology for the EVs as opposed to the infrastructure continues to develop and improve, and in particular the increased use of LFP products as opposed to lithium NMC products, that fundamentally drives down the battery cost. It will have the impact of sort of improving the performance of the vehicles, but which we should also see it driving down the cost, and clearly the battery is a huge proportion of the vehicle cost. So I would suggest that would be the first big driver to increased adoption. And I think the second thing, just that I might add, is that we're being driven to use EVs as part of carbon reduction fundamentally. And I think we will also need to see the increased use, or making the case that the fact that the EVs actually do reduce carbon, because then that will in turn drive legislation. And I think some of the things the EU are doing now in terms of a circular economy, use of recycled materials, recycling the batteries that are in vehicles, will in turn drive regulation to further promote the use of EVs. So again, I think it's that whole systemic approach. Number one, clearly cost, but number two, why are we moving to EVs? Fundamentally, that's carbon reduction, and I think anything we can do with that will also further drive people towards the use, and commercial companies towards the use of EVs.
I think that's really interesting actually, because in the UK with the battery strategy come out at the start of the year, I think it was on a Saturday, which was great for me, as I had to end up working on Saturday to summarise it. But I think within that it talks a lot about battery recycling, and particularly in terms of the fact that we don't have the raw materials needed to manufacture our own batteries and reliant on supply chains from abroad.
Yep.
So improving our battery recycling across the UK and Europe is going to be vital, really, to make sure we lower the prices. But there's also changes in battery chemistry, isn't there, at the moment? And I know people are looking at things like sodium-ion batteries, which would be a lot cheaper, right?
Yeah, I think to be fair, I think we're a long way away. I think that's more medium term. I think there will be, well, there currently is huge investment in lithium-based technologies. I think over the next, to pick 5 to 10 years, I think lithium will continue to dominate, whether it be NMC or LFP. What happens after that? Clearly, there's going to be work going on, not just in terms of across all energy storage. So I would include fuel cells in that. But I think at the moment we have an immediate growing area, and I think it'll be lithium based at least for the next few years.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And then Louise, Nick, if I may return to the charging experience briefly. I mean, we spoke a bit on our pre-call about accessibility. I know we touched on it at the beginning, But I think within accessibility, there's also a bit around safety and feeling secure at sites. And I know that at some sort of destination sites, you'll quite often have the charge points, let's say, at the back of a car park where it's less well lit, or certainly has been in the past. So it'd be interesting to hear what you're doing to make consumers feel safer as well, because that in part will also impact on EV adoption. And I know lots of Uber drivers, for example, who are saying that they're going to send back their EV and go back to a petrol car because they're finding the charging network too unreliable at the moment. They don't feel safe using it. So, Nick, I know you've been working with a company called ChargeSafe. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we work with a company and we're accredited members of ChargeSafe. So they are ultimately a company that's looking at all different angles of infrastructure deployment in the EV charging sector. And every site we deploy has a 140-point check in terms of accessibility, ease of use, environment, compatibility, safety. So some of the features around that is lighting, floor surfaces, disabled access, bay markings, signage. And I think it's a really important part as more and more infrastructure is deployed across the UK, it's deployed correctly. It goes back to the point of confidence. If the general public see that infrastructure is being deployed in the right style, again, it gives people confidence. One thing that we're quite fortunate, as I'm sure Louis is, with where we're deploying charge points, we are deploying them at destinations. We've got high footfall locations. They've got a lot of members of the public, and actually they are in well lit car parking areas, and people generally feel safe in public environments. But I think also, when we're looking at charge point operators, they generally do this quite well, where we've got individual businesses and freeholders across the UK, and they're investing in their own equipment. They don't necessarily have to follow any guidelines, and that's why it's important that freeholders and businesses around the UK, if they're looking to invest, they should make sure that they're going through some sort of consultation or consultancy to make sure the infrastructure that they're purchasing is being deployed in the right manner. I think another touch point for myself in terms of how do we get more people into EVs, and I think Thomas, you touched on, so affordability is definitely one area. Destination charging can provide a more affordable charging session. For us, AC charging is considerably cheaper than DC charging, and I think increased amounts of AC charging makes a more affordable option for people to make that switch. And I think the last point from my side personally is also the education point. There's still quite a bit of understanding, and sometimes media and press can influence that in terms of what's happening with the industry. Is the uptake right? How many chargers are being deployed? In the UK, actually, we're in a very, very strong position in terms of charge point operators. Charge UK was formed, which is a trade association of all the major charge point operators in the UK, consisting of 40 members. There's over £6 billion funding in that association that's here to deploy infrastructure and deploy infrastructure correctly. So I think ultimately, being able to educate, and that's not just from charge point operators, that's from a government perspective as well, to make sure the right message is being put out. People should have confidence that, one, they can purchase vehicles affordably, they can feel safe, and they know what they're purchasing. As you say, you do hear some stories, but ultimately you don't want to hear people making the switch and then having to go back. That shouldn't be the case, because actually the positives are far outweigh any negatives that people may think.
Right, thanks. And actually, there is an interesting point there around some information. And Louise, from your perspective, I'd actually be really interested to understand what your experience of misinformation is around electric vehicles in Europe, because in the UK we have a lot of problems with tabloids attacking electric vehicles and basically talk about how dangerous they are, how much of a fire risk they are, misidentifying diesel Land Rovers as electric cars and blaming them for massive fires in car parks and things like that. So I'd be really interested to hear from your perspective if you're also experiencing that in Europe.
Yeah, I really believe that misinformation is creating an important bottleneck here. Like we believe that the technology is ready. Like from a car perspective, cars already have enough range for people to trust on them. Today, well, at least in all markets where we operate, but I know that in the UK that this is the case as well. The charging network is robust enough for you to drive across the country without running out of battery. So in the end, there are government support to buy electric vehicles. So there's of course always more opportunity for increased subsidies and so on and so forth. But in the end, there is a lot of support from governments, in all the markets. So in the end, it turns out to an information and to a mindset change that is required for people to start buying more and more electric vehicles. And this happens with all the technologies. Like when cell phones were launched, and there were a lot of misinformation campaigns around how dangerous cell phones were for your brain and so on and so forth because of the radiation and stuff. So every new technology goes through this adoption phase where you need to go through all steps of adoption, where you start with the technology adopters, the ones that really like technology and want to be the first movers, and then you go through mass markets, and in the end you have the laggers that always fall behind because they only buy EVs because there are no other cars to be bought in the market. So I think we are reaching a point where we're starting to enter the mass market, and that's where the most of the noise is. This is where when you're targeting a small market and a niche market, nobody cares. But when you start to have a very mass market and you start tackling and gaining market position, and actually having real debates on what's going to be the future of transportation, and when EVs start to show that they are well positioned to become the best solution in terms of sustainability and so on and so forth, that's where the whole noise starts. And I think it's positive news in the end, because it's if you're hearing people complaining, it's because it's creating noise, and actually it's having an impact. So we just need to keep fighting in a positive way this negative feedback.
Well, no, fantastic. I think we've covered a lot of big topics here already today, but I wanted to briefly let's enter a slight fantasy world where, let's say, everyone else on this call are policymakers that we want to influence. If you had a wish list as for each of you, if you had a wish list of policy asks to really accelerate adoption of EVs, what would be at the top of it? What's the one ask? What's the one right at the top of that list that you think would move the dial? I know it might be quite a difficult question in some respects, but Thomas, as again, you're not on mute. I'm going to come to you first.
So I'm going to give you two related to energy storage, because that's why I'm here. So number one is the recycling. We need to promote recycling, reuse of lithium products. Now that's exactly how that should be done is a little bit up in the air, but I think that's certainly legislation on that at the moment. But I think that's certainly something that needs to be looked at. And secondly, I think it's the support of the grid infrastructure, and I think that needs to be promoted as well. As I think one of my colleagues said earlier, EVs are very good now. I think everybody agrees with that. So it becomes the charging points, and I think the one of the big barriers for charging points is clearly the grid infrastructure behind that. And I think it's not maybe legislation, but promotion and support of grid infrastructure to take away range anxiety on long journeys would be the way to go.
Brilliant. And Louise.
Sorry, I was on mute. I mean, I believe that governments are supporting basically every vertical of the business. So from charging infrastructure to to direct subsidies to EV acquisition. Where I believe, and this works against me, but where I believe subsidies are more necessary are on the user front, because I think that price parity between ICE vehicles and electric vehicles is still not there. So it's where I believe we need to support, to give more support. So I don't think on the EV charging infrastructure side there is lack of capital or interested companies to invest in, and I just think that the development of the networks is just a bureaucratic long process, but it's not happening faster because of lack of investment in the sector. Is more because infrastructure takes time to be deployed. So I would support users as much as possible. I would support users not only on the vehicle acquisition side, but also on the electricity costs on utilization of electric vehicles. So that's that in that way, you're basically giving competitiveness to the EV market when it compares to ICE vehicles, and when people are buying new cars, they can easily decide to buy an electric vehicle at the end of the day.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We'll speak about all of that in a little bit. So Nick, very quickly, what's yours?
Yeah, I think my point is to do with mainly focus on it in UK, and it's to do with VAT and making sure there's equal rights. And we know that almost 40% of the UK don't have the luxury of a driveway, and that puts them at a disadvantage. Those people with a driveway and a domestic property, they have the luxury of 5% VAT on purchasing of electric at their properties, whereas public charging networks, we are forced by regulation to put 20% VAT on that. So that puts those almost 40% of the UK public at a disadvantage if they don't have a driveway. And I think looking at the affordability piece, this would be a massive step forward if that could be equaled across the UK.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. So we've got an interesting wish list there. So we've got recycling and reuse of lithium products, support for grid infrastructure, subsidies on the user front, and equal to VAT for public charging. I mean, on support for grid infrastructure, the interesting thing, for me at least, is how different every country is in terms of how you connect to the grid. So, I mean, let's take Germany and the UK as two examples. Germany has about, I think, several hundred distribution network operators and energy companies, whereas the UK, we've got somewhere between 4 and 7, depending on which DNO has brought which other one in the UK any one time. I mean, in the UK, we have up to 7 different ways to connect to the grid, all basically a distribution network operator interpreting the same regulation in a different way, which is obviously really helpful for everyone. But obviously in Germany, it's much more difficult in some ways because you've got several hundred different ways of connecting to the grid. So it doesn't seem to me that there's a easy way necessarily to resolve that problem unless we go down the route of mandation and saying that we've got to have the same process everywhere. So I mean, Thomas, from your perspective, do you think that mandation would be the best way forward?
Yeah, probably not. In all honesty, I think it needs to be more promotion. I think clearly the DNOs know that they need to upgrade the infrastructure, and quite frankly, they're doing a lot to upgrade the infrastructure. And I think EV charging points is just one part of the overall picture in terms of what they're doing. So I would go a little bit easy on the DNOs, and I'm not certain that making anything mandatory would actually change anything at this point. I think just as a brief aside, I think from a technology point of view, I think energy storage can play a role, not necessarily ours, but in terms of smoothing out the demand, ensuring that the infrastructure is able to cope with charging peaks and troughs, for example, which, I mean, clearly, if you're putting in six charges in a cul-de-sac, on a new housing build, the assumption is made that all 6 of those chargers will be used at their peak output, constantly, and in most occasions that won't be the case. So the use of energy storage to smooth out those demands, I think can be important and relieve some of the stress on the infrastructure. And secondly, I think just as a quick aside, again, we're doing this to reduce carbon, and I think other forms of energy production, wind, solar, etc., will also help that. So yeah, I think I'd let the DNOs off to some extent. They've got a lot on their plate at the minute.
No, I appreciate that. I was playing devil's advocate slightly as well. And I would also agree that batteries on top of things like smart charging and vehicle to grid are going to play a vital role in improving that flexibility and
absolutely
making it easier. So I mean, Louise, on making it easier for the consumer and reaching that price parity in the UK, we've got the ZEV mandate coming in, or has just come in this year, and the government moved the targets to 2035 for the end of sale of internal combustion engines, and their argument was based on price, saying that by 2030, well, they didn't actually say this, but they said price was the reason why EVs would be too expensive in order to mandate, but they still mandated it, but just shifted the dial ever so slightly. It seemed more of a change in tone rather than a change in policy for the most part. But I suppose would you be? I mean, in the UK, we had a very good scheme, the scrappage scheme, that took a lot of the dirtiest cars off the road back in 2009, 2010. And it'd be really interesting. I mean, would you support some kind of scrappage scheme, perhaps, where your car is given a value based off their emissions and the potential impact to health that those emissions cause, to then encourage those people with the dirtiest cars to trade them in and get an electric vehicle to bridge that price gap between the two?
Yeah, I think there are several ways of subsidizing EV adoption in the end. So scraping is definitely a way that can be very, very efficient, to be honest. But there are other ways, like giving direct discounts on the EV acquisition through a subsidy mechanism or so. It's also very effective. We've seen other mechanism working very well, especially for company cars, where we've seen companies having very strong fiscal incentives to electrify their vehicles, and not only professional fleets, like also company cars as a perk to employees. Giving people EVs is becoming a very positive trend, both in Portugal and Belgium, for instance, where actually EV adoption is higher than any other country, than where Powerdot operates. So this particular incentive have very, very positive feedback from companies and users, and it works by allowing the companies not having to pay VAT on EV acquisition, on the acquisition of the vehicle, and not to pay any other taxes associated with the vehicle ownership. So it's kind of a 30% discount at the end of the day, and without any direct investment from the government, just by giving this tax debate. So it was a good one, but it's not the only one. I believe there are several ways. Scraping can be, I think, very efficient as well, as the average age of the car fleet is actually older than 10 years. So it's definitely a good way of looking at it.
Thanks, Louise. That's really insightful. And Nick, I mean, you'll probably be pleased to hear then that the Liberal Democrats in their manifesto said that they would equalise the rate of VAT, if they were to win, which some might say is unlikely. Obviously, you never know what happens on the day. I mean, are you hopeful that whoever comes in as the next government will see this as a priority going forward? Because I know in the past we've all tried asking Treasury for it, and it's been sort of pushed to one side.
I'm always hopeful. I guess it is the point. I think that as a trade association, which we're members of, is something that all CPOs are pushing for, and we do everything we can. Whether that we get that gets implemented, it is another thing. Probably don't want to turn this into a political webinar, but I think it's one of many things that can be done. But it's one thing I think, as we all know, the affordability is playing a huge part here. And yes, OEMs are bringing down the cost of EVs, and hopefully we're going to see that transition into an EV and accelerate even quicker. But I think ultimately the government are the ones that need to keep driving this, because it is change, and as we touched on at the start, no matter who you are, people don't like change. Some people like it more than others, but it's still a transition in life, and that needs to be supported by incentives and making it worthwhile for the public. And I strong believer, once people have made that change, I've only really ever heard good feedback, and people are really happy with the purchase that they make. So we fully support any incentives, and as you said, car scrappage schemes, lots of different ways of incentivizing the UK public when they are buying vehicles, and also second-hand EVs. There's no reason why people can't be enticed and incentivized to buying second-hand EVs, because they're also obviously now available in the market, and I think it's driving the adoption rates.
Fantastic. You know what, I've just seen in the Q&A, it's been popping off, and there's loads of questions in there that I've neglected to look at. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll quickly have a look at a few of those, if we may. So we've got a question from anonymous attendee who asked a question on fast charging or rapid charging. What is better for the battery condition of my car? Now, Thomas, I sense that might be more along your expertise.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's so I can speak about it in general, and certainly different batteries will respond differently, and different OEMs will maybe take a different view of this. From my point of view, I think keeping the battery at a reasonable state of charge is important, rather than running it down until it's until you actually need to charge it and you're desperate to charge it. So charging it on a regular basis is probably the best way of doing it, and operating around a happy mean, rather than just flattening it at a constant basis.
Yeah. No, thanks. I'm sure that would be very, very helpful. And I've got one other on batteries that I'm going to push over to you as well, if I may. So this is from Jason Baker, who says, "Hi all, I've recently inquired about a sustainable energy project at my facility and capturing regeneration utilizing battery units, or BESS. We were told by the potential supplier that it was on hold due to external requirements. Not really clear why. Could you shed some light on why that might be?"
So yeah, it's difficult to comment specifically, but battery energy storage systems, or BESS, are certainly another rapidly growing area, along with EVs. There are a couple of things, issues in terms of the installation. One is supply. Everyone in the world wants a BESS system. It's not just EVs, but large data centers. The national grid are building loads of energy storage areas. So. And that's global. And secondly, I believe that there are always issues around planning permission. For example, I've heard of planning permission about installation of these things, and safety. We touched on some of the areas earlier today, and conformance. So I think it's supply and compliance issues.
Brilliant, thank you. We did get another question as well. Maybe, Nick, this is more in your wheelhouse. So they say, as you touched on, Nick, we don't like change, especially in the UK. So do you think the UK government needs to take more responsibility in getting the general public on board with EVs, and how should the government go about doing this?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I actually was looking at that comment in the chat there. I think it's very important it's coming as one direct message. As we've seen, I think the industry, there is lots of noise being created, which ultimately any noise is somewhat good noise, because it means EVs are on the up. But I think a direct message and educational piece to really lay out the sort of benefits of making that transition is required. And I think there is so much confusion, and many different events and many different clients or potential clients that we even talk to. People have a different perspective of what EV charging is, and what electric vehicles are. And I think having that alignment and sort of top-down approach from the government driving campaigns and educational promotion is only going to benefit everyone. And that's straight from the adoption rates for the OEMs and then to the charge point operators, because I think people often talk around what's a rapid charger and what's a fast charger, and those sort of identification and having that understanding is key fundamental bits for people to make that transition. So I think ultimately larger educational campaigns led by government parties is going to just put the UK in a better place, and other European countries.
So I should say the UK government did, in their plan for drivers that came out, I think November last year, say they were going to do some more on this information. I know they have subsequently updated their website, where they have had a misinformation page for a number of years, but it had very low traffic, was my understanding. And so they thought to improve that, they would update it and added a number of new Q&As on EVs, which are quite informative. Now, I think that's pretty much all the questions in the chat. But yeah, I know Peter said, also the life of batteries and cost of replacing them can be very expensive. So, I mean, maybe, Thomas, very quickly, I mean, do you think something like a battery health test or requirement that I know Labour are calling for would be very useful for the second-hand market to ensure that, if nothing else, that we understand?
Yeah, and I think that's coming in as part of the new EU battery regulations, a battery passport, battery testing, which will give the history of the battery through its life, and hopefully, if it has a second life outside of the EV, then that will then have mean that the battery that's finished its EV has a value, which can then support any new purchase of batteries. So I think that's certainly something that's coming and that's being looked at the minute.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's our time now. So we're going to wrap up there. Just say thank you to all three of you for putting up with me for so long, and to everyone else as well for asking some great questions. But yeah, I'm going to hand back over to the organisers now.
Thank you for that session, Luis, Nick, and Thomas, and thank you for that excellent moderator, Matthew. I'll make sure to get your name right this time. Yeah, there was a lot of information there. And that's a really great session. So thank you so much.